Before we jump in and talk about a whole bunch of gear and how to take photos, I think it's good to first identify what makes a nice looking family photo. And I've broken it down into a couple of different things that we can look at and kind of narrow it down here. So one of the things that I think is really important is the ability to control the light. Now, we're mostly going to be dealing with outdoor settings. One benefit of shooting indoors is that you have some control over the light because you can basically block out all of the ambient light. If you shoot in a room with no windows, you can make it very, very dark, and therefore you can control the light a lot more easily than you can outside. Outside, you can't really control the sun too easily. You can shoot in the shade, but whatever is past your subject, whatever's in the background, may be difficult to control. So that presents a couple of challenges in how we control the light. Now, one way that we can get a little bit more control over the light when we're shooting outside is to use some flashes or speed lights or strobes. These will provide us some more kind of supplemental light that we can direct and we can modify and we can have control over to help balance the exposure of the face and kind of shape the light and create the shadows where we want, and really get a lot of control over the outside. Plus, shooting outside is great because there's a lot of nice looking things outside. So that's what we're going to be looking at. All the photos that we're going to run down here and take a look at are going to be outdoor photos. Some things that make a good looking family photo, I think, and this is just my opinion now, are contrast and punch, okay? What I like to see in a good looking family photo is something just like this, where we have a nice punch here on our family. Here's my sister, Lisa, her husband, Matt, and their firstborn, Jackson. This photo was shot, I think, 2 years ago in the fall, which is why it's kind of brown and orange back here and there's no leaves on the trees. But what we have going on here is it's a very overcast day and it's pretty dark. It's also a little bit windy. That's why we get a little hair kind of flying around here. But what I'm using here is 2 flashes to be able to give a nice big kind of light source from over here on the left in front of them. And I'm using another one back here and up to the right to give just a little bit of highlight here on the shoulders, on the side of the face, on the hair here, just on the edge here. It's almost working like a hair light or a rim light or a kicker, sometimes it's called. Between these 2 lights, we can get something really nice in this kind of very flat looking exterior lighting. Now, if we didn't use flashes in this, it would look pretty nasty. I mean, it would be very, very even light because when it's overcast, there's almost no shadowing whatsoever, but that's not very flattering. I mean, the lack of shadows is sometimes more flattering on people's faces, but it doesn't give you any depth. It doesn't give you any shaping. It doesn't give you any texturing. It's boring. So that's something that I like to see is a good bit of punch and contrast, especially between the foreground objects and the background. I don't like to see overexposed backgrounds, but that's just my personal preference. Some people like overexposed and blown out backgrounds. I don't really. That's not my style. I like to see good smiles on everybody. Now, when you're working with adults, that's pretty easy. When you're working with children, that can be real hit or miss with the old kiddos there. Another thing that really helps make these photos look great is a nice eye light, sometimes called a catch light. Now, this, to me, really brings a nice sparkle to the eyes. I'm going to show you a photo that doesn't have this here. Here's a photo of my daughter taken 3, 4, 5 years ago. And this was an overcast day at the beach, and you can see there is no eye light. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's no bright hot spot in her eye. And so if you look at this kind of full out here, this looks kind of dead and lifeless. There's no sparkle in the eyes. There's no life to the eyes. Now, this also, you can see there's not a lot of contrast and punch. It's all kind of mid-tony gray, a couple of shadows here, but everything's just kind of mush, and there's no real sparkle. There's not a lot of texture. I mean, this picture is sharp and in focus. I mean, it's relatively sharp for what it is. This was taken with a lens that's not super sharp, but this is in focus, but still there's not a lot of texturing, and that mostly has to do with the lighting because it's all flat, so there's no shadowing anywhere. There's no nice texturing on the hair here. It's all just kind of flat and mush, and that's why the background is not that much darker than the foreground because we don't have any control over that. We're just using ambient light. This is what it is, and this is basically the best that it's going to get. We could try and reflect light using a reflector, but because it's overcast, it's not really going to work super great. Here's another example of the same thing. So shot on a real overcast day, a little bit brighter of an overcast day, but you can see the same thing if you look in my daughter's eyes here. There's no real sparkle. There's no real highlight in the eyes here, and everything's just kind of flat and lifeless. There's no real difference between the foreground and the background. Despite the fact that we're both kind of yelling here, and I have a weird kind of beard thing going on here. So this is raw and completely unedited, and so is this here. These aren't terrible photos. They're not great photos, though, and that's what we're really shooting for. And so those are kind of the basics. And for me, achieving the kind of light punch and the sparkle in the eyes and some nice kind of shaping and shadowing and getting some nice depth means we got to use flashes, especially outdoors. Now, on the other side of things is not only do we want to capture a nice looking image, we want to Photoshop it and make it even better. And some of the things that are involved in kind of Photoshopping and retouching are things like blemish removal. Does someone have a little pimple here we need to clean up? That's something that is really good to do. Skin smoothing. Not everyone has skin smooth enough that you can ice skate on it. So a little bit of skin smoothing really helps out. Evening out the colors. I know for myself, here's a picture of my family. Here's me, my daughter, my wife, second youngest daughter, and my son here. We have one more baby. I generally have some kind of redness in my nose, usually always, and my cheeks. My skin isn't perfect. I'm not a runway model, obviously. But smoothing out the colors and kind of getting rid of that really, really helps to make a nice photo, especially when the rest of my family has perfect skin. My wife has great skin, all my children have really great skin, and I kind of have a Rudolph nose. That's just the way it is. So a little bit of Photoshopping there really helps. And also kind of matching the exposures between all of the skin tones really helps to make what I think is a really nice looking photo. Sometimes it can be helpful to take care of any rogue hairs that we may have. Now, if you're shooting outside, there's a good possibility that there may be wind. Women with long hair, that may blow, and that may cause some hairs to be kind of up here. Depending on the background, sometimes we can take care of those, sometimes we can't. For this particular photo, I chose just not to because that would have just been a real mess in kind of masking. It would have taken a really long time, and I didn't think it was a huge deal. Sometimes, for instance, for this picture here of my sister Lisa, this was a little bit easier to be able to mask around, so a lot of these hairs that kind of go up here, I kind of trimmed off and faded just a little bit, and that really helps kind of make the background a little bit cleaner. Teeth whitening. Not everyone has super bright white teeth like you see in these couple of photos here. Everyone has really, really nice looking white teeth. You see that here? Boom. My sister actually does have really nice teeth, but even children can have a little bit of yellowing in their teeth, and that's totally fine. But I think that kind of correcting that in Photoshop is a nice thing to do, and it makes for a nice picture, especially if you're getting some nice big prints. The other thing that I like to do is create a little bit more kind of control over the foreground and background by masking out basically all the people and the background so that we can colorize the background, we can blur it a little bit more, and we can kind of adjust the exposure from the foreground to the background. And that's going to involve a good amount of masking and some kind of detail work in there, especially if you want to blur the background at all. That can become pretty tricky because as you get to the edge here, with these hairs here, you can't really just kind of blur around this and kind of, all these little hairs that stick up here. You just can't blur those because that's not going to really look right at all. And then kind of finalizations in Photoshop, things like some curves adjustments, give everything kind of an overall kind of punch and contrast, give everything kind of a tone and kind of a colorization. Maybe we want to warm the whole image up and, not just work on the foreground and the background. Some general sharpening of the whole image, maybe give it a tiny bit of noise to help, especially if we blur the background. If there's any kind of noise here in the foreground, we're going to have to add a little bit of noise here. I for this particular picture, I did add noise because I blurred the background a tiny bit. And so in order to avoid kind of banding And to match the general kind of grain of the rest of the photo, I added a little noise. Now I didn't spend forever and do like a match grain kind of thing. I just add a little bit of noise because it really wasn't a huge deal there. Some of the noise is a little bit more obvious because we had to push the colors around a little bit more. And for these photos, for this particular photo series that I did of my family and my sister's family, I didn't shoot raw, which was a mistake. And then finally adding some vignetting is also something that I like to do in the kind of finalization stage, just to kind of bring focus to, where we want the focus to be. I just want to show you a couple of these pictures here. Here's a photo that I shot, a group shot when we were out apple picking with a bunch of our friends. Now, this is a very overcast day. I just brought my camera, and I'm not even sure I used my off-camera flash on this. I know I used my flash because if you look closely, you can see a nice catch light in all the eyes. There's a nice little reflection there, and it may be filling in the faces a very tiny amount. Now, I know it's not a lot because if it was, we'd see some bigger shadowing here on the nose and in the eye sockets here. But because the shadowing is very, very soft, I know that this was not a lot of flash light coming from the camera. That's why this particular picture does not have a lot of kind of punch in the front. See, the sky is essentially completely overexposed. I'm not sure there's any difference here, and so we didn't get a lot of contrast there. Here's another shot of the kids at Disney outside of Space Mountain. This shot was shot without a flash, and you can see the sun is coming in from behind here. There's some clouds in the sky, but generally the sun is out in full effect. That's why we have super hard shadows here, and it's not a great photo. Now, if we go to this one here, boom, look at this. We got all kinds of contrast, really nice fill in the front. We got some nice kind of glow in the skin, in the cheeks here, in the forehead, where we get a little bit of shimmer from that little kid's sweat there. You can see there's a huge difference between this, which is essentially, there's no difference between this and, a really good iPhone picture, and this, which looks a lot nicer, a little bit of photoshopping, this could be a nice frameable picture. Here's another kind of example at Disney before we saw this show in this stadium here, and it had some kind of dim lighting. And what I did was I used the flash actually to bounce off this gentleman's shirt here to be able to kind of give my daughter and I some really nice soft light. Now, just taking a shot with the ambient light would have looked dull and lifeless. You can see by now we're pretty much in complete darkness here. But by using that flash, we're able to get some nice punch in a really nice looking image. It's different than when a flash is right on top of the camera, because when the flash is on the camera, you get shadowing straight on. So I'd have shadowing here right behind my glasses, right underneath my chin here. I'd have a nice hard shadow. But because I bounced it off of a surface, I essentially had like a, almost a 3-foot square light because I bounced it off this guy's shirt here. And he didn't mind because for him, it was just a flash going off and he didn't have any idea what was going on. But it really made for a nice kind of beautiful looking light here and kind of a cool shot here for me and my daughter. Here's another shot of the whole family here at Disney, and I did an off-camera flash. Now here you can see the flash is not being diffused. And that's where we get these kind of hard shadows here. You can see that it's pretty hard there. Not super flattering, but this shot without a flash would have looked really dull because we are standing in complete shade here. And so, matching the sunlight exposure with shade exposure is impossible unless you use a flash. Here's another one with the flashes, just a little bit more balanced here. And I can't get my son to smile for anything, but that's all right. And here's another example of a shot that I did. This is just with one flash and a large diffuser. My buddy Josh here proposed to this beautiful girl, Esther here, and asked me to take some pictures literally minutes after he proposed. And so they're outside. It had just rained. That's why he's got some water on his jacket here. This is the raw photo, not really that spectacular at all, but with a little bit of photoshopping, this looks a heck of a lot better. You can see here, cleaned up the skin quite a bit. I mean, you can ice skate on this skin right here. Really got into this background here and gave it some nice color. You can see by using that flash, we get a beautiful eye light here. We get a really nice shading here. I mean, all of the ambient light is coming from behind. If without the flash, they would be in complete shadow because the light is coming on full blast here from the sun, which is why we're getting this really nice hot kind of edge light here from them. And we're getting a nice beautiful fill here. And with a little bit of cropping and a little bit of shopping, we get a really nice picture here. Now here's another kind of group photo here. This is not edited at all. You know, a lot of times if you're shooting outside, you'll read advice that says, you know, keep the sun to your back, low in the sky, and that is some good advice. And if you do, you'll get a shot that looks something just like this. The problem with that is looking into the sun is actually quite difficult. And so a lot of times you get eyes that look just a little bit squinty. Even if you try and hold your eyes open, it's, you know, it's not really the most pleasing thing to do. Now, the shadows here are all kind of nice. You can see it's low, so it's throwing a nose shadow a little bit more horizontally than maybe what's ideal, but we get a nice exposure here, and compared to the background, we get a nice punch here because we get some nice separation from the background, and you know, it's working pretty good here. And generally, you know, these darker colors are darker than a lot of the stuff that we're wearing in our skin tones here. So that works okay, but using flashes out here would have been a little bit better because we could have had a nice little edge light, which would have helped us to separate, and we could have gotten a little bit more controlled light, and we could have got rid of a lot of these squinty eyes here. I'm not saying that you can't take great photos without flash, but the power of flash makes for some really great looking photos. And so that's what we're going to be looking at throughout this course, is using flash and how to set those up and how to manipulate those to get great looking shots outside.